Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as we are now all under this big area of high pressure with generally much milder upper air temperatures. And it's not going to equate to very mild conditions at the surface. Yes, some areas will get into the double digits over the coming days, but many, especially further southwards and eastwards, it will be a little bit more up and down, as we do see perhaps a slight inversion taking place, especially later on this week. That brings the risk of a few isolated frosts and generally chillier conditions, and by day we could still get to 7 or 8 degrees, and some days might not get much above 5 or 6. So not quite what we'd expect given the upper air temperatures, but still a lot milder than it was last week. However, that is all going to change as we head into next week, as we do start to see the Atlantic unlock. It looks like this massive cold plunge that we're going to see across North America is really going to fuel the jet stream, and depending on what happens with that cold plunge, then we could go exceptionally stormy as we do head into the final third of the month. At the moment, most runs have got a big area of polar vortex sat towards northeast Canada, Greenland, as a result of that big cold plunge, and it really spins up some really deep areas of low pressure heading our way. However, we do have a signal for some high pressure to build towards Scandinavia, so it could be a real battle between east and west. At the moment, most runs do have that low pressure in the Atlantic winning out. However, the effect of that Scandinavian high could mean that the low pressure systems coming in from the west are weaker, they get slowed down, losing their intensity, and potentially the Scandinavian high could have some time winning out. And if it does, then we could draw in some very cold air in from Siberia. But, big caveat, most runs are not showing that at all. They show it having some influence, but really not doing much other than potentially shifting that jet stream further southwards and blocking it a little bit, but not enough, as I said, to turn us properly cold. I said we'll have to wait and see for those longer term prospects, but I said that's going to be something we need to keep a very close eye on over the coming days. What happens with that Scandinavian high and what happens across North America? So all of these conflicting scenarios could collide to create quite a disruptive final 10 or 12 days of the month. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now, to start on the live radar, you can see we have got bits and bobs of rain at the moment, so we do still see these weak weather fronts trying to push in from the west, but with this big area of high pressure, it squeezes all the energy out, and all we see is a bit of drizzle, lighter rain, could be heavier in the far west, with some more weather fronts moving in over the next few days, but at the moment nothing too much, just some thicker cloud trying to push in. Most areas are fairly mild now. We are pretty much all out of the very cold air. The far south and east still chilly, still below average, but we will all be seeing those slightly milder temperatures arriving over the coming days. Yes, we could see some slight inversions, but that risk has slightly dropped today, so perhaps less frost and less cold daytime temperatures. You see this evening, recording this around 7:30, still the risk of an isolated frost in the far southeast. We're just hanging on to some of the colder air. You can see it's all very cold across mainland Europe, but you can see where the mild air is pushing in. Still chilly in places, especially where there's some remnants of winteriness, of a bit of snow around, especially those higher ground of northern England. For most, though, all of that has melted now, and generally, as I said, southwards and eastwards still chilly, but most areas will be around 0 to 2 in this region, hovering around freezing or above freezing. Only a few are likely to go below. You can see though in the north and west it is very mild now, temperatures into the high single digits, maybe even getting to the double digits by day as we do head through this working week. Now, do look at the latest UKV. You can continue to see weather fronts trying to push in from the west over the next few days, not having much success. You can see they continue to linger, try and push in, but lose their intensity. And yeah, really don't do much. They keep flirting and getting pushed away. And you can see as we head into the weekend, brighter skies start to build in. But for most, it does go pretty cloudy and maybe even foggy at times, as those weather fronts, as I said, lose their precipitation, but still bring in some thicker cloud that tries to push through. See, the upper air temperatures are continuing to be very mild. Again, not equating to very mild conditions at the surface. Definitely milder, but still seeing a slight inversion, which still keeps it a little bit chilly in places. Look at the temperatures overnight tonight. It's an isolated frost in the far southeast, most though around that sort of 2 to 5 degree mark. Tomorrow afternoon, most are average to above average, 7 or 8 degrees across much of England and Wales, getting up towards 10 to 12 degrees further northwards and westwards. Into Wednesday, again, not massively cold overnight, maybe a 3 or 4 in a few isolated spots, and by Wednesday afternoon we are all about 2 to 4 degrees above average, 10 to 12 degrees the max. Same can be said as we head into Thursday, again, an isolated frost in a few further northwards and westwards across England and Wales, and by the afternoon, a little bit chillier, more towards the mid to high single digits, and that continues into Friday, where it starts turning a little bit colder there. Again, clearer skies, more of an continental flow, just turning it a little bit chillier there later in the week. Risk of, again, a few overnight frosts and generally chillier conditions into Saturday. So because of a slight change in wind direction, it does look like kind of Tuesday through to Thursday will be slightly milder than we anticipated over the weekend or late last week. But it still does look like we will see a return to something slightly colder as we do head into the weekend. But again, we're not expecting anything major because, again, those upper air temperatures are not that cold. It's just a slight inversion taking place with that continental flow. Now, if you go into the longer range, you'll be able to see these sort of mundane, drier conditions are not going to last. You see the high pressure continues to be in control over the rest of this week. However, low pressure gathering steam, and look at all the purples and blues starting to gather across northeast Canada, Greenland and Iceland. It really takes off in around a week's time. Look at this massive pooling we start to see very quickly, and it's as a result of an exceptionally cold blast across much of the United States. If we do have a look at the North American view, look at this massive blast of very cold air, pushing that all out into the northeast of the United States, Canada, into the Atlantic. What it does for us is it fuels these big low pressure systems, fuels that lobe of tropospheric polar vortex, and that's why we see this exceptionally stormy spell, potentially. Again, it's a pretty well-known phenomenon. If the US goes very cold in one of these very big polar vortex blasts, it's pretty likely about 5 to 7 days downstream, big areas of low pressure head our way. Because all of that energy, all of that cold air, as it collides with that warm mid-Atlantic air, very strong temperature gradient, it does normally spin up these big low pressure systems. If it's more of a sustained colder spell and not one of these massive polar vortex blasts, then it's probably caused by blocking towards Greenland or something of that sort, and that can turn us both cold. But in these sort of polar vortex blasts, it does generally turn the North Atlantic pretty stormy, and that's exactly what we see here into the final 10 days of January. You can see how all of these patterns are connected. So subtle shifts in the forecast for North America. What happens? Do we see a nor'easter there? That will all have downstream effects on what happens for us. You can see, though, it will be a battle between these really deep areas of low pressure and the Scandinavian high that's trying to build. It is actually trying to really push in easterly winds. There is quite a big cold pool that tries to push in, but this latest GFS, it doesn't have too much success. Perhaps having more success later on, but generally the westerly flow does win out. It's a big enough block to drive the jet stream southwards, so it keeps us on the cooler side of the jets, so average to below average temperatures, but not cold enough for snow or anything like that. You see the upper air temperatures are hovering around the freezing to -5 mark, so maybe a bit of snow over higher ground, but not expecting anything elsewhere. It's if this high really gets going, that's when we could see something much, much colder. But at this stage, it's there. It does affect us to a certain degree, could set up a bit of a battleground scenario, but the GFS, and as we'll see, other runs do agree with this, it is likely to keep that westerly flow, at least have that westerly flow winning out the majority of the time. If we do compare to the latest GM, again, high pressure firmly in control over the coming days. Eventually, those big loads of polar vortex develops towards northeast Canada, Greenland, as a result of that big cold spell across North America. And you can see generally we do go pretty stormy. Not as clear-cut, though, as the GFS, not as organised. And as I said, if we do look at North America, if we do look at their cold blast, it doesn't travel as far southwards, and it's a bit more dispersed. You can see it's actually a more widespread pattern, but it's probably not quite as intense, and it lingers a bit longer. So what that means, that temperature gradient isn't as high. Again, it is still exceptionally high, and it's not as quick in development, which means that low is not quite as strong, not quite as organised, and downstream it means that these lows here don't develop as quickly and as intensely. Again, it's very small changes, but it has downstream effects, and is again a bit of blocking trying to develop towards Scandinavia, but similar to the GFS, not really strong enough to really get going. Now finally, if we check out the latest ECMWF, broadly, very similar, high pressure in control. Eventually, that very cold blast for North America, you see it with the explosions of purples and pinks, and that is that polar vortex getting exceptionally well developed there through North America. Again, if we look at the blast, because it's much more contained, the GEM had it much more spread out. Again, it's these very subtle differences has knock-on effects, but much more well developed, and it pulls away a lot faster. Remains this one big lobe of very cold air, and what that does, as I said, downstream, is pulls into this very deep area of low pressure, creating this huge storm system at day 10. Again, there is a Scandinavian high. It is attempting to pull a colder easterly flow, but you can see here these low pressure systems are winning out. This big lobe of stratospheric polar vortex is winning out, and at this stage I would expect us to go fairly unsettled. Maybe not exceptionally stormy, because this block to our east may halt the progression of these lows and kind of make them lose some of their intensity, but nonetheless still could be exceptionally unsettled there with bands of heavy rain. That high pressure to our east could be our saving grace. Yes, we'd still likely see wet conditions, maybe windy conditions, and low pressure systems pushing in, but with that block it prevents the quick transition of these lows, which means that we don't see anywhere near as stormy conditions as we could see if the Atlantic was completely unlocked. So this battle we're going to have to keep a very close eye on in the coming days and the next couple of weeks. Now, to finish by looking at the latest ensembles, you see generally we are above average in the upper air temperatures for the next kind of 5 or 6 days at least, and you can see it is very dry as well. So again, high pressure in control, chilly conditions, milder than it was last week, but nothing amazing, nothing in the sort of the low to mid-teens, like we would expect with a sort of straight southwesterly flow in this sort of pattern. Still a bit of an inversion taking place. However, you can see as we head into the final sort of 10 days of January, we're hovering back towards average. Some colder runs, some milder runs, but nothing too overwhelming, and increased precipitation. Now, given the looks of some of these runs, you'd expect to see some massive precipitation spikes, hugely stormy spells. However, we're not quite seeing that, and that's because I think a lot of these runs do have that battle with that high pressure further eastwards that just takes the sting out of the low pressure systems. Not saying at all that we are going to see an easterly wind, we're going to see a Scandinavian high, but that influence could just limit the strength of that westerly flow, which is a good thing. Would mean less disruption, mean weaker winds, but it is still a week to 10 days away. That high pressure could weaken significantly, or it could strengthen, or it could kind of just stay where it has been. If compared to the 2 metre temperatures, generally this week, sort of mid to high single digits for London, hovering around average for the time of year. And even longer term, when that westerly flow comes in, even though the upper air temperatures drop, 2 metre temperatures actually stay similar or even slightly higher. And that's because more mixing of air means those surface temperatures do turn a little bit milder. Sea level pressure, generally very high, lots of dips longer term, again massive uncertainty. And if we finish by looking at the ECMWF ensembles, again hovering above average by a good 5 degrees over the coming days, and then generally back towards average into the longer term. You see the operational run ECMWF there for midnight. We had a look at the midday earlier. Went very cold in the longer term, and that was because that Scandinavian high won out. Not full-blown beast from the east, but the very cold air mass that comes around that high got in to eastern parts of the British Isles. It just shows you the risk is there. I'd say it's very low, and you can see not got much support from ensembles, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. At the moment, though, it looks like there's going to be a real battle between east and west. At the moment, it does look like those westerly flows will win out. I'm kind of 80% sure of that, but can't really give any more confidence until we get nearer to the time and, of course, firm up those details, as there is the risk of some exceptionally stormy conditions given that big push of polar vortex into North America. That will really gather some headlines over the coming days. Of course, we've got those fires down in LA, and give it a couple of days, the media will be onto this big polar vortex blast. Not sort of the coldest blast we've seen in the last few years, but one of the coldest we've seen in a few years, going back, the last decade or so. It will be one of the coldest blasts. So yeah, we'll make some big headlines, I suspect, in the next week, and that is what is going to have a downstream effect on our pattern. Of course, if that weakens, if that slightly alters, then you can see from the GM, it does give a slightly different impact downstream. So we'll have to wait and see. Once we've got that sort of firmed out, then we can finally start to see exactly what the northern Atlantic will shape up to be. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.